Actually, Tim missed one, which is that I've just rekindled a promising career as a Prime Minister impersonator. I didn't go so well for the last few years, but I reckon I'm in there now. Kia ora tātou, ko David Downs toku ingoa. Very nice to be here. And I said to Fran, you've either given me the worst slot of the day or the best slot of the day. I'm not sure, but thank you very much for having me here. I am going to talk about a couple of things. First is about the brand of New Zealand and how we show up in the world, and in particular how we show up in America. And then the second thing is, hot off the press, literally in the last sort of 24 hours, some new research that we have just completed on American perceptions of New Zealand. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to share that with you as well. And it sort of builds on some of the content that we've been talking about today, about how New Zealand as a country needs to show up for our friends in the United States. So, first of all, for those of you who haven't heard of the New Zealand story, I like to describe us as a weird joint venture of government agencies. Basically, 6 government agencies have come together and said we need to create a story that's bigger than any individual piece of work that we do. It's about export, but it's more than that. It's about tourism, but it's more than that. It's about education, but it's more than that. And basically, the construct of the New Zealand story has been around now for about 10 or 12 years, and our job is to expand global perceptions of New Zealand, and basically get the rest of the world to see that there is so much more to us. We're very lucky in New Zealand. We have a very strong international reputation, but our reputation is actually not followed up by a lot of familiarity, and that's what you're going to see in these slides. So when we talk about the New Zealand story, of course, one of the challenges is there is no one New Zealand story. There are millions of stories from New Zealand that help create our brand image. But when we talk about it, we tend to try and narrow it down to some of the stories from New Zealand that really define who we are and what we stand for. And the great history that we have, and the history of this country as being the last major landmass on the planet that was settled by human beings, only just over 1,000 years ago. In that period of our history, we have these incredible stories. The stories of our settlement, unique. The Polynesian people who came here and became the Māori people were adventurers, were pioneers, were explorers, navigators, scientists. We had the first Pākehā who came here. They were challenging themselves to find a better place to live in a different way. They didn't want to recreate the conditions they had in England. They came to New Zealand, and they created things like the 40-hour working week, the labour movement, ACC. Of course, New Zealand, the first country in the world where women had the right to vote, is a huge thing that we in New Zealand know, but the rest of the world might not realise. And all these things go to our credentials as a country that really thinks about people and thinks about the environment that we're part of. The Whanganui River, Te Awa Tupua, one of my favourite recent stories about how we've recognised the river, the Whanganui River, as being a person and having the rights and privileges and law of a person. And that's such a unique way to think about how we protect our environment. So collectively, these sorts of stories come together to create this kind of global image of New Zealand. And when we think about this, there's other things about New Zealand that we New Zealanders take for granted, but are such a critical part of our brand story. For example, our trustworthiness. And I know, trust is one of those things that many people put on their corporate sort of set of values. But for New Zealand, it's actually one of our most valuable attributes. We are, by definition, one of the easiest places in the world to do business, lowest corruption, highest transparency, all these sorts of issues and ways of being that make New Zealand's brand actually globally pretty attractive. And things that really we know resonate when you start to tell the story of New Zealand to the world are things like, for example, the story of our democracy. New Zealand is the 3rd oldest continuous democracy of any country in the world. That's quite remarkable. In fact, I think, Rosemary, you told me this stat, Ambassador. It's an incredible statistic, and it really resonates, particularly when you subtly point out that, yes, the United States has been a democracy since 1789, but were all people able to vote since then? No, not until the 60s. Switzerland, 1848, democracy began there, but actually women weren't able to vote until 1972. And so really, New Zealand has got this incredible position of being the world's oldest democracy. I like to say we invented democracy. And of course, there's other statistics about New Zealand that the rest of the world would really appreciate. And it goes to this point that sometimes the world sees us as a small country, and we unfortunately as New Zealanders perpetuate this myth. when we talk to organisations and companies before they go out on trade missions, one of the things I always try and say is please don't perpetuate myths about New Zealand because they're not true. New Zealand is not a small country. When you take into account our sea territory, we are the 4th largest country in the world. It's a significant sea territory, but even our land territory is pretty significant. And of course, we've got major cities. We're in a major city at the moment. If Auckland was transported and planted into the USA, it would be the 5th biggest city in America. We went on the trade mission, went on the trade mission with our previous Prime Minister. And I said to her, I told her the stat, if Auckland was in the US, it would be the 5th biggest city. And she went, oh yeah. And she came back 10 minutes later and she said, I didn't believe you, David, so I Googled it, and you're right. And I hope I'm right, because otherwise I'm lying to you. But essentially, this is the point. New Zealand has substantial, large urban environments, and that's something that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily always appreciate about us. Partly, just to be open, this is to do with the fact that America has a funny way of thinking about cities, but we have a kind of a super city model. But that's okay. That's what defines our country. I mentioned also our sea territory, and our airspace is the other significant one. I mean, we again in New Zealand have become accustomed to this idea that we've got a lot of air and a lot of space around us. We have this 6% of the global airspace is under our control. That's a massive amount of territory. So again, let's not perpetuate the myth that we are small. Let's perpetuate the myth that we are a global superpower sitting at the bottom of the world. And this, sure, I mean, most of that airspace is empty. I will grant you that. But that in itself is actually an opportunity. And we all know this again, that only a few years ago, this would have been a Flight of the Conchords sketch. Someone looked at that airspace and said, there's an opportunity in this, and they created the space industry that we now have. And the idea that New Zealand is now the 4th most prolific of all the countries on the planet. We send up more rockets than almost all of them. We were the 11th to put a satellite in space. We have over 240 companies in that space sector. It's not just Rocket Lab. It's Dawn Aerospace, it's Kia, it's Whisk. There's hundreds of companies now in this aerospace. And the beautiful thing about the aerospace sector is they're doing it in a different way. They're doing it in a way that really does demonstrate our values. Looking at fuel that's better for the environment, looking at reusable 3D printed components, etc. So these are the sorts of stories that I think that we need to tell the world. Now, particularly when we talk to our friends in America, helping them realise that we're not actually that small a country. We are about the same size as the western seaboard of the US. If you transport New Zealand over there, it's actually physically quite a large country. Sure, America's a very large country, but New Zealand is not actually that small either. So these are the sorts of things that are really important for us to build from the positive brand recognition we have and to start to build more familiarity with New Zealand. So, does it matter? I mean, one of the things that we think about at New Zealand Story is, does country branding actually matter? Most New Zealanders don't think about this, but most countries around the world have an organisation like ours that thinks about the brand of the country. And what I can tell you is it absolutely matters. There's a huge business case around the brand of a country. It attracts foreign investment, tourism and talent. In fact, there's some research that's come out recently that says about 26% of the consideration set, of the things that factor into someone's consideration of why they make an investment decision into a country or travel there as a tourist or move there, nearly over a quarter of it is because of the brand value of that country. So New Zealand's got a huge asset there. It obviously makes our products and services more desirable. We can command premium products. The whole business case for New Zealand has got to be around premiumisation. We can't compete on scale always. We've got to go out there in the world with premium quality products, and brand is a huge part of building that. And of course, it strengthens our diplomatic ties. So for us, the brand of New Zealand is one of the country's biggest assets. In fact, when you measure the assets, you'll discover that the brand of New Zealand is worth $280 billion US. And this is not my number, this didn't come from our organisation, this comes from an independent global valuation. You can see they're about the same as Apple or Microsoft or Amazon. We are a hugely valuable asset that sits on the balance sheet. The virtual balance sheet of New Zealand is this asset that we have. And we have to protect it and grow it and learn how to utilise it, make sure that we can get value for our exporters, for our tourism operators, from that brand value. But it's a huge part of New Zealand's story, if you like, is the brand that we have. About New Zealand Story, we do multiple things. We have a toolkit of imagery and graphics. We do a lot of content. We manage the fern mark. I'll tell you that in a minute. We do market research. So those are the sorts of activities we do. And one of the things I'm going to talk about momentarily is some of the research that we've just completed about the brand of New Zealand and how it's showing up in America at the moment. But of those 5 things, I just wanted to pick out one. I talk about this $280 billion US brand value. We know that the most recognised international symbol of New Zealand is the fern mark, the silver fern, far more than our flag, far more than a picture of a kiwi. And so we have a program where you can license the fern mark and use it on your products or your services, and that's a hugely successful program. We've got about 570 companies now utilising the fern mark, including some of the biggest from New Zealand. And it's a network effect. The more companies that go out there demonstrating the values of New Zealand, showing that they're from New Zealand, the better it is for everybody. So, on to the research. With all that in mind, we typically go out and ask and try and understand from other countries what are their perceptions of New Zealand. And it's been particularly interesting over the last few years, given COVID and the changes in New Zealand's sort of brand perception through COVID. And we just finished this piece of research. It was a huge quant research, so that's where you go out and ask lots of people a simple set of questions. And then on top of that, we layered some qualitative research. That's focus groups. We had 6 focus groups, I think, in America, where we're really digging in on that information. And the data's just come through. It reinforces many of the things we already knew, and it adds some new interesting things. Firstly, again, we've got this perception from America of New Zealand of being a utopian paradise, of being this sort of mythical, desirable, faraway place. That's not a negative, that can be a positive. What we need to do is make sure that they know that there's more to us than Wanaka and Glendew Valley, and that our nation's brand is more than just beauty. It's also science, it's technology, it's many other things as well. So this is some of the perception work that's been done globally. I mentioned a quant survey, so this is a global quantitative survey. An international firm asks about 150,000 people around the world what they think about different countries. And what those 2 lines shows you there is, first line is what do Americans think about New Zealand, and the second line is what do Australians think about New Zealand, just to show something. The difference, obviously, you can see there's many more green and lower numbers in the second line, and that is because what we realise is there's a massive correlation between familiarity and value. So Australians know more about us, therefore they value us more highly. So that's a good sign for us that work in this sector, because that means that if we can help people be more familiar, they'll value us more highly. What it shows, though, on the first line there is in America, we still didn't do badly. Out of 192 countries, the first line there, the GSPI, that is, where did New Zealand rank in the perception set of American consumers? And that says we were number 18. Of all the countries in the world, New Zealand ranked number 18. And you can see there, in terms of reputation, it was even higher at number 7. But there's some real gaps as well, and the gaps is where we have our challenge. So it's almost, if anyone is in marketing in the room, this is a marketing funnel, those first 3 lines: familiarity, reputation, and influence. How is our reputation? Incredibly high. How familiar are they with us? Not particularly. How much do they think we influence them? Not at all. So that's the conclusion of those 3 numbers on there. And then it breaks down into these particular metrics that are drivers of those others. So this is getting a bit esoteric. So we took that data and we said, let's learn from that and let's go and ask a whole lot of American consumers what they think. We did a whole lot of panels. This is over the last 6 weeks or so, run by Accenture, to understand how, first of all, do Americans see themselves today? Because everything is in context. When you do research study, you always look at it in context. And of course, Americans have their own perception of themselves. It was interesting to hear Guy earlier talking about the different sort of cultural nuances. First of all, Americans see themselves as influential in the world, as innovative. Those are strong attributes that have been there for a very long time. The 2 that have come through, which have definitely grown in importance over the last few years in the survey results, is around Americans perceiving themselves as being a divided country, as being a country where they have got deep divisions, and potentially even a declining country. And I'm the messenger, don't shoot the messenger. This is the data from the research. When the researchers said this to me, I went, I've got to be careful how we present this. I will point out that the surveys were largely done on the coastal states, and so you're probably getting a bias towards urban areas and potentially democratic-leaning areas. So, but the reason we chose those is because those are the very markets that the bulk of our products and services go into. So these are the types of consumers that we appeal to. So that's how America is kind of seeing themselves at the moment: influential, innovative, but potentially divided. We asked them what were the things that they would perceive to be that are important to them, and how they would perceive other countries, particularly in the areas of which we call ingenuity, which is around science, innovation, influence in terms of technology and things like that. So how might we build New Zealand's perception in those areas? And these are the 5 attributes. They said, Americans respect organisations or countries that portray power and might, that are seen to be driving some sort of conversation, thought leaders, that are transforming our daily lives, so they're having an impact for me as an individual, but also having an impact for humanity. So think particularly around climate change. That's probably the big topic that came out of this. And that last one there, the caretaker for planet Earth. So those are the things that American consumers are telling us right now are factors that would make them have a higher reputation or higher assessment of a country's influence on them. And so, of course, then we said, well, how do you think about New Zealand? How are we perceived in these areas? First of all, on the power and might, no surprise to any of us, we're not perceived as being powerful or mighty. That's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just the reality. We're seen as a relatively small country. In terms of things like driving the conversation, are we seen as thought leaders? Are we seen as transforming people's daily lives? The answer is possibly not. We're seen as quite laid back. We're seen as having some influence, but there's really pretty low, what we call mental availability. It was hard for people to go, this is something that's come out of New Zealand that helps me. But where we are perceived positively is around doing things that are good for humanity, having the ability to act on behalf of the greater good, and definitely in being good for the planet. And this is a perception that they have, not necessarily what we try and portray, but it's the perception they pick up. And so we get these positive brand perceptions that come through. What we need to think about is then what do we do about that, and how might we then take that information and do something with it. And so from my assessment, what that means is that when you're talking to American consumers or businesses, it's important for us to reinforce the positive things they think about us. That yes, we are a country where we care about humanity. We are a country where we're caring about the planet. Now these are things that have got to be proven. You've got to put some proof points behind it. They want to see that we've got some sort of global impact and global initiatives that help. But it's not as credible to start talking about New Zealanders get the biggest, the best, the fastest, the first, because those things just aren't as credible in the minds of American consumers. So to us, that sort of talks about playing to our strengths. So we're a country that's perceived to be good for the world, good for people, good for the planet. Not strong, not daily influence, but good. And that's not a bad place to be. And as I say, the way that we perceive that, what we would do things about that is trying to make sure that we reinforce those positive perceptions, that we create a consistent narrative, that the sorts of news that comes out of New Zealand that we can influence does reinforce some of those positive attributes. These are just a couple of articles that have come up recently that seem to have got good media attention. And when we see media uptick, it tends to be about stories that either reinforce our brand, or sometimes, frankly, where our brand is not resonating, where we're doing something that seems to be dissonant with our brand. Those are the times that the media sort of really picks us up. So that's kind of the core insights. We'll publish this research. As I say, the key takeaway for me is that we have a kind of a brand proposition that we talk about at New Zealand Story, which is that New Zealand is a country where care for people and connection to place is what drives our ingenuity. That's not a slogan, that's not a logo, it's not a campaign we're putting out there. It's just kind of the brand promise that we think that we're curating on behalf of New Zealand. What this reinforces is that in America, it resonates. It absolutely resonates with the research. They look at us as a country that cares for people. They look at us as a country that cares about the planet. And they see that when we do have ingenuity, it's for some purpose, for some greater purpose like that. So that's the end of my presentation. I think that we've got an amazing country brand. It's $280 billion US. It's something that we should all be very proud of, and we should work out how we can leverage for our benefit. Leaning into these key messages is a great way to keep reinforcing that brand. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. It's a great presentation. I think you can take that the X off ex-comedian, actually. You can probably, I think we can gift that back to you. I've got a couple of questions here for you. There's a few things in that. So I wondered, you talked about the merit of a country brand, but when you think about it from a business perspective, what is the point of having a brand at all if you're a business exporting internationally?
Well, I mean, most businesses will realise that there's such intrinsic value in brand for their own companies, their own organisations. Brand is a way of creating value that is apart from the normal productive methods. You don't have to create a new product to create brand value. So I think that's the first thing. If you've got a strong brand, you can command a premium price. So similarly with a country brand, when we've got a strong country brand, we know that products and services from New Zealand can command on average a higher price. I was in Europe recently, just as an example, and I often go around supermarkets, look for New Zealand products in supermarkets. Just me? Oh, no, probably Pete does it too, I'd imagine, but I always think it's quite cool. And I picked up this product, and it said Maori Bay Sauvignon Blanc, and it had all sorts of cool Maori symbols on it, and I thought, that's cool, and then I looked at it and went, Sauvignon Blanc, hang on, it's from Adelaide. Now, there's a reason they're passing off as a New Zealand-looking wine, is because they know that our brand is worth more than their brand. And so, they can command a higher price. So there's definitely value to be had, when you exploit the New Zealand brand.
Did you buy the wine? I bet it tasted rubbish.
Yeah. It was a 2-litre cask, but I made my way through it. Such a headache, though. It's terrible quality.
We heard this morning from the Prime Minister, who spoke about the need to execute well and to move quickly, particularly in the United States, but also to hang on to those unique values and Kiwi charm.
Yeah.
How well do you think we do that?
Yeah, when we talk about the values of New Zealand, we often talk about this mixture of sometimes quite congruent and sometimes surprising things. So the brand of New Zealand, as I mentioned, is care for people and place. It's ingenuity, but there's something a bit extra and special. And when we really looked at the brand of New Zealand, we said there's an element of what in Māori is called pōtiki, the youngest child, this kind of pushing, curious, doesn't do what our big brothers and sisters do, wants to think a bit differently. And that element of sort of surprise that comes through our brand is definitely something. I mean, we're the country that invented bungee jumping, We were the first to fly a plane. Thank you, Richard Pearce, although the history books might not reflect that. So we've got something about us that does think a little bit differently as well, and I think so those values of care, but mixed with this kind of innovation and slight sometimes surprise, I think is useful. Yeah,
what's your view, this might be a bit controversial, but what's your view on the Bird of the Year result? Because I think there's a lot of people that are really disappointed in that, but I wonder if you have a different view.
Well, first of all, the tui was robbed. It's a travesty. Oh no! Look, isn't it cool when another country cares enough about us to do something on their national primetime news? And I don't know if anyone watched it, but it just got more and more surprising when you watch that bit of footage. On one hand, you go, "Oh no, it's just reinforcing stereotypes of New Zealand being a cutesy little country." Remember, this was the guy that. Oh, I shouldn't go that way. There was an incident with a toy a few years ago. You might remember. It was the same guy did the same thing. But then on the other hand, like we actually sent John Oliver a letter, and we worked with Forest and Bird New Zealand, and Forest and Bird named the first pūteketeke after that's now called Jolly after John Oliver, and we sent him a thing and invited him to come to New Zealand to meet his namesake bird, and so we're kind of in dialogue with them about it. So the idea is that they see this kind of quirkiness to our nature. And we need to lean into a little bit of that, but at the same time we said, come down and we'll show you there's a lot more to New Zealand than just, funny named birds. This is the country that's launching more rockets into space than virtually any other country in the world. We'll take you to a rocket launch if you really want to go to one. So it's that kind of idea of trying to take something that they've thought about and twist it.
Yeah. Another thing that's come up quite a lot today is the importance of sustainability to New Zealand. Miles Harrell spoke about the risks and the importance of it, particularly in the United States. What's your view on that as part of Brand New Zealand?
It was all going so well until you asked me that question. Look, I seriously think that on one hand, we've got an asset in that the rest of the world does perceive us as being sustainable. Every survey that ever gets done by anyone ever shows New Zealand very high up in this. On the other hand, I think we've got a huge brand risk, which is that if we aren't living up to the perceptions, whether we tried to set them or not is not the point. It's other people perceive a certain thing, and if you act in a different way, it creates a challenge for you. So I think there is a brand risk. We recently, about a month ago, launched a campaign, a little media campaign internationally called Aotearoa Net Zero, because NZ stands for Net Zero in New Zealand. Oh, marketing genius. Had to have a little lie down after we thought of that one. But anyway, the point was we launched this campaign which is showing the New Zealand businesses that are doing well, the organisations that are doing things in the sustainability front, not trying to say we're perfect, not trying to say we're better than anyone else, just saying here's some companies doing things with ocean-bound plastic or packaging or whatever it might be, in a way that says, look, we know we're not perfect, but we've got these organisations that are trying to do the right thing. So I think if we're authentic with our messaging, I think we can get through. The other thing I'll say, and you and I are both working on this, Tim, so it's a bit self-serving, is I do feel there's an opportunity for New Zealand to be much more explicit about some of our claims that we make, whether they're implicit or explicit claims. And I think there's an opportunity for us to create a New Zealand-wide agreed system for how to portray our credentials when it comes to things like sustainability or animal welfare or water use or whatever it might be. And we're working on that at the moment with the MPI and Assure Quality on thinking what that system might look like.
And final question, because everyone here looks polite, but really they're just waiting for the prize draw that's coming up right after this. So, final question.
I heard you're going to get that lookalike Prime Minister guy to do the prize draw. That's
but I wanted to ask you about trade missions, because we heard today from the Prime Minister, from the Deputy Prime Minister, and from the Trade Minister about how we're going to have the most number of trade missions any government's ever had. Wow. What is the role of New Zealand Story when it comes to those types of missions?
I mean, trade missions are an amazing opportunity for Team New Zealand to show up in a really coherent fashion, and those of us who've been lucky to be on those sorts of missions realise that there's all sorts of benefits that accrue from a mission. You form this incredible cohort of people that go together and learn each other. You know, the big learn from the small. The technology companies are learning from the dairy companies and vice versa. So there's benefits in that. I think whenever New Zealand has the opportunity to be on the global stage, and a trade mission is a perfect opportunity, we don't have the eyes on New Zealand very often. You know, I mean, to be honest, John Oliver does a thing about a bird, we get eyes on. FIFA Women's World Cup, we get the eyes on. When we travel, we can create an image of New Zealand, and that's our opportunity, therefore, to reinforce the brand. Who we are, what do we stand for, what is our culture. So it's more than just having a bunch of people in business suits walking around a bunch of factories or supermarkets and trying to learn. It's our opportunity to go a step further, and given I've got 12 more seconds, the greatest example I can show of that was we were on the US trade mission last year. Fran was with us and a few other people in the room. We went to the Massachusetts sort of trade office, the equivalent of NZTE, but for the state of Massachusetts. And the guy was very polite. There was about 20 of us. The guy was very polite. Yes, this is the opportunities in Massachusetts. This is the industries here, blah, blah, blah. And he was a bit bored looking. And he sort of halfway through said, look, you know, I know you guys are here from New Zealand, but yesterday we had, you know, Denmark, and tomorrow we've got, you know, Canada, and what makes you any different was the sort of point that he was making. At the end of the meeting, we stood up to leave, and I think it was Grant Straker, started singing the Waiata, which is just so natural to us to do, to say thank you to this guy. We sung the Waiata, we cleaned the room up a bit, you know, we tidied away our dishes, and we put the chairs away, and you could see in that guy's eyes that he'll remember that group. You know, and it's not always about doing a Waiata, but it's more the fact that you're authentically showing your country's values in an opportunity when you're on a trade mission. So that's where New Zealand Story, we hope, comes in. I mean, that was just an organic thing that happened. But we hope that we can kind of remind ourselves and our participants that this is the opportunity to show who we really are.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, David Downs and Prime Minister Impersonator.
Thank you.